quite excited for what you're about to see. Now, firstly, just to apologize for any weird sound things you hear, I'm recording this at work on my lunch break, and I'm sort of in an open air space because it had the best sound quality rather than sitting in a small booth. So, I might not have put up any videos in the past while, but that doesn't mean I haven't been busy working on some. And in fact, I'm really quite excited to show you the next two videos that I'm about to put out, which are actually full games that I've made. Okay, they're not polished games, they're not finished games, but they are games. So rather than showing off like a single feature or a single request, this is an entire package packed full with features and things that you can dive in and copy from and learn from. And I'm really excited to share it with all of you. But I wanted to make sure that everyone could benefit from it. And especially the biggest game, called Trial by Fire, involves some programming in JavaScript. And I recognize that GDevelop, being a game engine that pitches itself as not needing any coding, means that there's probably a lot of you watching this who have never either heard of JavaScript or used JavaScript before, just don't feel comfortable with coding. And that's fine. That is absolutely okay. You don't need to be comfortable with coding to use GDevelop. But in order to make sure that everyone could benefit from being able to poke through and feel comfortable poking through and changing things in the game files that I put out, I wanted to make this presentation in order to give an introduction to JavaScript. Now, on that note, this is a slice. This isn't a full JavaScript tutorial. This won't teach you how to make websites or even games in JavaScript. What this is very specific for GDevelop, and this is everything that you'd need to know in order to feel comfortable looking at the code in future videos. So if you've never done any coding before and it sounds really, really scary, just hold on. I think you'll find it'll be okay. The other side of it is no one is going to be asking you to write code. This is about familiarity, because if you watch this presentation and you become familiar with what you're seeing, then it means you'll be more comfortable when you come to actually look at code and go, okay, I know what this does, these weird squiggles and these weird spaces, and what does that symbol mean? So, and also, whilst we're talking about this being a slice, there's a lot of content that I just can't go into. So some things I will just give a reason for and say, it's because it is. And if you're curious, you can go on and find more. But this is me trying to cut through all of the sort of explanations and just give you everything you need to know in order to understand, the code if you're looking at it. So without further ado, let us begin. What is JavaScript? So yeah, it's a language that powers most of the internet. You can find it, websites are a very common one, but it's popular in servers, it's popular in games, and yeah, GDevelop, the desktop application, is programmed in JavaScript. Can you believe that? And yes, JavaScript is sometimes its own enemy. The link provided is to a talk where someone goes through some of the funny and often bizarre nuances of JavaScript, and basically it's a fun watch. So let's start with the basics of programming. What is a variable? So on the screen here we can see meaning of life is 42 and moon is full. A variable is the meaning of life and it is moon. And basically a variable is something we use to hold information. Or if you want to get technical about it, it's something we use to hold a value. So when we look back at this, these examples, meaning of life and moon are the variables. These are things that will hold the information, and 42 and full are the values. So if we say meaning of life is 42, and further on in the code you see the variable meaning of life, you know that it actually holds the value 42. So how do you give variables, pardon me, how do you give variables a value? Well, you assign them to it. And when you assign a variable, you are basically saying this has the value of that. And you do this with the equal sign. So we are saying that meaning of life has the value of 42, and moon has the value of full. That's how you assign a variable. That's what it means. It means to give it a value. Now, variables come in two different types, and the type is basically answered by the question, can this variable change? So another way of phrasing it is, after I give this variable a value, can it have a different value? Now, it might not seem important, but actually, whether you answer yes or no to that is important for JavaScript. It's also usually important for other kinds of languages too, but we're just sticking with JavaScript. Also, pardon me, I just took a drink of water. If I do that a couple more times, you'll just have to bear with me. So what we're seeing here is we're seeing the same meaning of life is 42 and moon is full, but then we have these words before it called let and const. What do they mean? So let's start with const. Const is short for constant. And just like the phrase constant, it means this variable can never change. So if we say const moon, which is how you declare a variable, const moon equals full, and then a bit time later we try to say moon equals new, well, the code will actually fail. The computer will actually fail it for us. The other one we saw was let. And what let means is this variable can be changed. So if you say let meaning of life is 42, and then sometime later you say meaning of life, actually, who knows? Is who knows? Well, actually the computer's fine with that. And so this is how you declare and assign a variable in full. You either say let and the variable name, or you say const and the variable name. Which one should you use? What's the major differences between them? Well, prefer const, and let is a good second place. The reason why you should prefer const and constant variables is because it gives you certainty on how the program's going to run. If you say const, then you're declaring to the computer that this will never change, which means that if there is code that later on changes it, the computer will give you an error, which tells you that either you've made a mistake, you're trying to change something you shouldn't have, or in fact, actually, you really need to change it, in which case you should change the const to a let. So that's why I give these first and second place. Write everything with const first and change it to a let only when it needs to be changed. You will also see in a lot of other kind of programming tools around JavaScript the word var. Without going into the reasons why, it just basically put it aside, never use it, don't think about it. Var is an old way of doing things. Var's been basically replaced with let, and var has certain properties. It still works in code, but it has certain properties that can trip you up and get you confused and make unexpected things happen. So if you just don't use var, you're fine. So we have our variables. We can assign values to our variables. Well, something that's also very important for us to be able to do is compare them and check what's inside of them. And comparing is, well, as you'd imagine, asking the question, is that variable this value? And the answer to that is either true or false. And this answer, where it's either true or false, is known as a Boolean. Pardon me, getting another drink. So, let's say, you wanted to ask the question, is the meaning of life 42? Well, this is how you could write it in code. If you have a meaning of life variable, and you can say, use 3 equals, and then 42. Don't get scared, let's break it down. Why are we looking at 3 equals? This looks bizarre, this looks baffling, this is confusing. I completely and utterly agree. But remember, 1 equals is assignment, 2 equals, don't use it, just without going into the reasons why, because it's a long discussion in and of itself, just don't use 2 equals. If you want to compare whether the left side is equal to the right side, use 3 equals. So let's take this statement. If the meaning of life is 42, do something cool, and let's actually turn it into code. So let's start with the first bit, if. How do we write if in code? Well, actually, it's just like this. We write the words if, we have these parentheses, and then we have these curly braces. Now, don't let these symbols scare you. Let's dig into it. Inside of the curly braces, we have a comparison, and inside of our parentheses, we have an action. So, in effect, what we're saying is if this is true, do this. Comparison, action. So let's bring it back to our example. So let's wrap the comparison in parentheses. Let's add some curly braces for our action, and then let's wrap our action in the curly braces. Now, so remember, this is our comparison, so if that is true, then this is our action. We should do something. Well, let's turn meaning of life into a variable, and let's pretend it's been assigned somewhere up above. So if meaning of life is 42, well, let's go on to the is. We know that is 3 equals. So if meaning of life is equal to 42, do something cool? Well, let's just leave it as a placeholder to do something cool. And we add a comment mark. What's a comment? Well, a comment is 2 forward slashes. What a comment is, the symbol you use for a comment depends on each programming language. But basically what a comment means is this is a note to someone reading, and the computer does not use this. So if you see a comment, if you see 2 slashes in the JavaScript followed by some comment, it is the programmer telling the person reading it, this is something. So often comments are used to explain what a bit of code does, or be used as a placeholder for do something here, and it's basically just a general way of being able to write normal text inside code that the computer just doesn't run. And so there we have it. We've turned our sentence, if the meaning of life is 42, do something cool, into code. We have our comparison, if the meaning of life is 42, and then we have our action that it should do. So we've looked at variables, we've looked at how to assign them, and we've looked at how to compare them. Now let's look at data, and for our purposes, we're going to look at JSON. Now JSON has the fancy name JavaScript object notation, but what you really need to understand about it is that even if it looks crazy, it makes sense pretty quickly, and JavaScript, as you might tell from the name, loves it. It has it built in from the get-go. JSON is an incredibly popular data storage format, and most websites will use JSON in some way, shape, or form in order to transfer data between your computer and them. One of the nice things about JSON is that it's limited. There are very few things that can actually be in JSON, and this is basically all of them. Objects, arrays, numbers, strings, booleans, and null. Now, some of those you might recognize, some you might not. Let's go through it. Let's start at the bottom. This is a null. That's right, null means literally nothing. If something is null, then it's because a programmer has made it so that you're saying this value, it does not exist at all. And this is useful for us in some cases, can sometimes trip us up, but it's good to know that null means literally nothing. Boolean we've come across before, it literally means true or false. String is basically written text. On a technical level, strings are made out of characters. The letter S is a character, the letter T is a character. But a string is a lot of characters inside of quotation marks. Now, in JavaScript, you can also write strings with single quotation marks. You can also write them with backticks. These all have slightly different properties to each other. So, if at the beginning all you use is quotation marks, you'll be absolutely fine on that. Numbers, yeah, it's a number. 1 is a number, 100 is a number, 42 is a number. Numbers are not too complicated. Now we get onto arrays, and this is, time for some squiggles. What are these square brackets doing here? Well, square brackets are how we declare arrays, and let me break down arrays for you using an example. Say we have these 4 boxes sitting in a row. These boxes can, hold things in them. These boxes can hold things in them, but we only know 2 things about these boxes. We know which box is the first one, and we know how many boxes there are. Well, if we wanted to find out where all the boxes are, or label all the boxes, what we could do is we could label them from how far away from the first one they are. So the first one would label as 0 because it is 0 boxes away from the first one. We could label the next box 1 because it's 1 box away from the first one, then 2, then 3. And what we call these labels is an index. And so an array is an ordered list of boxes, and each box has an index telling you how far away from the first one it is. The first box is always 0. So if you ever see, you'll see later, but if you ever see something 0, it means we're talking about the first box. And the last box is always the length of the array minus 1. And the reason it's minus 1 is because, our first box doesn't start at 1, it starts at 0. So as you can see here, we have 4 boxes. Our first is 0 and our last is 3. The length of 4 minus 1. Now, let's say, for example, we wanted to store the moon at index 2. So what we do behind the scenes is we find the box that is 2 away from the start, and we stick the moon in it. Now, let's say we wanted to get out what's in a box. Well, we effectively ask the computer, get me what's in index 2. We find index 2, and we grab out whatever we want from it. We grab out whatever's inside. Now let's say, for example, we ask for get me what's in index 0. Well, index 0 doesn't have anything. And so what happens is the computer comes back, I don't know. And the technical term for this is undefined. So if you try to find out what's in a box that's empty, you get returned undefined. Now, undefined is slightly different from null. Undefined just means this exists, but it doesn't hold anything. Null means a programmer has intentionally said this means nothing. Now, undefined can be useful for us, and you'll see, either later or in other tutorials, how we can use undefined in order to do things that we want. Equally, if we say get me what's in index 4, obviously here there is no index 4, you get back the same undefined. So I guess that's the crux of it. You can also overwrite things. So if you say store car in index 2, you find index 2, and you put a car in it, and it removes the moon, which was previously in there. So boxes can only hold one thing at a time, and you can replace those things, but it still only holds one thing. So let's code it up. This is how we initialize an array. So we write const box, that's going to be our variable name. We say it's equal to, and we have 2 square brackets. And what that does is gives us, under the scenes, a variable called box that is an empty array. Now, how do we insert into it? So we say we have our box, and we write our variable box, we put square brackets, and these square brackets means that we're doing something to the array. We're going to put the number 0 there to say that we want to put something in the first box. We're going to say it's equals, and moon. So what this does is, inside of the code, we've said that our array box has 1 item in it, and in the first index, it holds the moon. So we've got our constant box, and it has moon in it. Let's insert something else. So this time we want to insert into the second index, the second element. And we're going to say, so box 1 is equal to car. And so this is what you'll have at the end, moon, comma, car. And so if you were to look at what an array looks like inside of the code, you have all of these elements separated by commas. Now, let's see what happens if you try to replace. So we have our box, our constant box, which has moon and a car. So if we say box 0, so we're doing something to the first element, and we say it's equal to cake. Well, this is what you get at the end of it. Your first element is cake, and your second is car. And then we come to the last thing that we can do, which is retrieve, taking something out of the array. So we have our constant box, which has a cake and a car. We're going to declare our first variable, and we're going to say it's equal to box, square brackets, to say we're doing something on the array, 0. And what this will do is it will assign our variable first to cake. Equally, we can do the last. So we can say we can take our last variable and say it's equal to box, and remember that the last index is length minus 1. So for tidiness sake, what we can say is const index is equal to, so we're declaring a variable called index, and we're saying it is equal to the box dot. If you ever see dots in programming, what that means is you are asking for something on something else. Let me break it down. So boxes are an array, and our array has a value called length. We know it, and we can use that. And so what we can do is we can say box.length, which will get us the length of the box, minus 1. And then what we can do is we can put the index inside of the square brackets on box. And so what this will do, what this will do is, because index is the length of box minus 1, when you do box square brackets index, it basically gets you the last element. We could write this all in one line, like so. You can write box square brackets box.length minus 1, but I like being tidy. I like separating down. And so what this will do is it will say box.length is 2, 2 minus 1 is 1. And so the line that assigns it is actually saying box 1, and that gets us car. So that's how we retrieve items from an array. Now let's go into objects. Objects are represented by this squiggly curly brace. They're the same curly brace that we saw with the if statements, where you put your action, but these mean something slightly different. Let's try and visualize these curly braces as a bucket. This bucket can hold cake, this bucket can hold cars, this bucket can hold a whole moon, this bucket can hold nearly everything. This this hastily put together meme says, this bad boy can fit so many properties in it. Property? Well, what's a property? Is it something on a Monopoly board? Is it something that you pay a mortgage for? No. A property is a way to store information in the format name equals thing. The fancy technical term for this is key equals value, and the real way it's written is like this. So key is a string, so it's enclosed by quotation marks, and instead of an equals you have a colon, so key colon value. So if you a car can be the key and the car can be a value. The moon in quotation can be a key, and this moon picture can be a value. So let's take our bucket, and let's say that we want to store this as moon. What actually happens is we slap a big label on it called moon, and then we throw it in the bucket. Which means that if anyone later says, get me moon, well, we look in the bucket for anything with the label moon, and we get it out. if we try to ask for a label that doesn't exist, like get me a car, well, we hit undefined again. You can also do the same replacing. So if you say replace moon with this, well, what happens is it will find, if there's an object in the bucket called moon, it will slap the label on something else and then replace it. Let's look at what it looks like in code. So we initialized this before, so we can say const bucket, so we've declared our variable bucket, and we're saying it's equal to, and we use these curly braces in order to say it's an object. If we want to insert into a bucket, what we do is we, now bear in mind this might look a little crazy. Josh, there's square brackets there, that's the same thing as arrays. Yes, but just hold on and look. If we want to insert something, we say bucket, and we use square brackets, and then we give it our label. So here we've got under quotation marks moon, and we say moon is equal to some kind of moon thing. It could be a string, it could be a number, it could be whatever. And what this does under this behind the scenes is, inside of our variable bucket, we now have our property with the key is moon, and the value, separated by the colon, is also moon. So this is our starting position. We've got a bucket with a property with the key moon and value moon. That's probably a mistake on my part. Cool. Well, let's ignore the fact that I'm not going to go back and re-record this video at this point. And there's a couple of slides out of place. There's a lot of slides in this presentation. Mistakes happen. So we've got our we've got our bucket that has moon, and we want to add a second thing. We want to add our car. So we take our bucket, we use the square brackets, and inside of them we use quotation marks, and we say car, and we can say it's equal to some other value. And well, that should insert it. I ignore that last line. Basically, it inserts it correctly. What does replacing do? Well, replacing is, as we said, it's the slapping the label on something else. So let's look at it this way. So we've got our bucket, which has a moon and car in it, moon and car properties, and we say moon is now actually cake. So what this will achieve at the end is that we have our still have two properties, but for our key moon, instead of having moon, it actually holds cake. And same for retrieving. Remember that. So whilst in arrays we could retrieve first and last, because arrays are ordered. They have a start and they have an end. Array objects don't have that. In fact, objects underneath are unordered, which means that they're not guaranteed to be in any kind of they're not guaranteed to be in any kind of order, and that generally speaking, you access them by the keys inside of it. So if we wanted to get something out of this, well, we can declare our variable. We can say it's equal to, so we assign it bucket, square brackets, and we pass it the key. You can also do pass it, do dot, and then pass the actual key name, but I like to keep things consistent and safe, and this is how I like to do it. And what this does is, oh boy, that's gone off the bottom of the screen, that's no good, but basically first will equal to cake. So what it does is, inside a bucket, it looks for the label moon, and it will assign to the variable whatever it finds. So if moon didn't exist, that variable would be undefined. And basically, yeah, that's how it goes. Now, if you're feeling confused by all of that, that's okay. Like, I'm not the greatest explainer. This has been, even if it is a kind of long video at this point, this is a very short primer. But remember, all of this is to help you understand what you're going to see in tutorials. And so let's go on to some live examples. So On the left, you can see all of the JSON, all the things JSON can be. So object, array, number, string, boolean, and null. On the right is just a simple example of JSON I took from the internet. So what you can see here is that you have examples of objects. So inside of this body, you have a bunch of different. You have a couple of objects which have the fields of the properties of ID, name, and description, where ID is an integer and name and description are strings. And we can also see that there's an example of arrays, where body itself is an array of objects. And if you are starting to realize, if this is starting to twing, some thoughts in your head, like, hang on, so as an array can hold anything, it can hold numbers, it can hold strings, it can hold other arrays, it can hold other objects which can hold arrays. Yeah, actually that's how JavaScript works, JSON works. All of these things can build off each other. So you can have arrays and objects of arrays and all of that. You can basically set out your data in a way that makes most sense for it. Now what I'm showing here is data from the next video I'm about to record. This is data from the game, and here you can see the same kind of things. So you see that square bracket at the top? Well, the entire data field is an array. It's a list of things. But then inside of it, oh yeah, you can also see arrays inside of it. So let's break down, and then there's some objects. Yeah, let's do this a little more ad lib. Let's break down what we're seeing. We can see that this entire block is an array, which means that it is a series of boxes. This is the first box. This is the second box, and it keeps on going down to the end. Inside of each of the boxes, inside of each of the elements, is an object. That object contains two fields, round and units. Round is a number, units is an array. Inside of the units array, there's more objects, and each of those objects is an actual unit. You can see it has the properties name, column, and row, where name is a string and column or row are zeros. And you can see on this first round that there is exactly one unit in the array, but in the second round there's exactly two. So what this allowed me to do when I was creating it is what I'm effectively saying is, and not that I've written it down here, but this is, I call this round data. That is, I want to store down what enemies should appear in a given round. And so what I'm saying is round 1, each round has an array of units. And that can be 1, that can be 2, that could even be 0, but it's not 0 because there's got to be enemies. And so what I'm saying is each round has a number associated with it, so I can find it. And each round has a number of units. And each unit has a name, has a column, and has a row. And so this is how I built up my data that I could use for the game. So there's our arrays, there's our objects. Oh. And yeah, just before we leave arrays and objects, arrays have some built-in tools. So if you ever, and I'm not going to go over this for too long, because it's just better to understand it by sight than to understand how it works. But arrays have built-in methods, and a method is just a bit of code that runs that allows you to do some cool things. So this method says, and as you can see it's written down, for each bucket in the array, do something to whatever is inside. And the way you do that is you take your array variable, you say dot for each, and then you basically have this weird setup of like characters and symbols. But what's important is that we're saying for every box in the array, we're going to do something to that box. And this is incredibly useful for us. We also have another very useful one that I use quite regularly called filter. And what filter does is it says, go through each bucket and return me a new array only with the buckets that match my criteria. And so what we can see here is I left in one var. I was trying to clear out the vars and write const. don't use var, use const, don't be like me. So we're declaring a variable called filtered array, and what we're saying is our array dot filter, and then for each box inside of it, we do some kind of if statement, and if that's true, well, we return true. Otherwise, we return false. Those are the booleans again. And what this does is, for every it will fill a filtered array with a new array, and that array will only return elements which return true. So, a simple example could be, say we had the numbers 1 to 10, and we could say, if our number is divisible by 2, return true, otherwise return false. Filtered array in this case would be the numbers 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. It would contain an array of only the numbers that match true. Anyway, this has turned out to be A, very long video, and B, even though this presentation went through several rounds of work showing it to other programmer friends and getting them to critique it, it's still not perfect, and I'm sure I've made a total hash of it and confused many of you, but, if you have made it to the end, firstly, good for you. You can give yourself a round of applause. But if you are still confused, and you should feel no shame at all for still feeling confused, I would still encourage you to go on and watch the next video, the actual trial by fire tutorial, because that is what all of this is for. The point is not to understand everything that, to immediately understand and be able to use everything that you're seeing. It's to be able to recognize it when you do see it. Once you recognize it, then you'll start building familiarity with it, and once you recognize it, you also feel confident in making changes to it and playing around with it, and in my opinion, that's a pretty good way to learn. Thank you very much for watching and sitting through this 234 slide tutorial. You can see the last thing I did there. I'll see you at the next one, and am I excited for it?